Today we're going to be factoring quadratics again, and today we're looking at cases when a is not prime. Yesterday all the examples had a, which is the coefficient of x squared, was a prime number, and today it will not be. So when a is not prime, the first thing you need to do is check for greatest common factor that can be factored out of all three terms. So we look at our first example and we see, well, is there a common factor? And we see the greatest common factor of this one is 4, which I already have written here. Greatest common factor is 4, so the first thing we're going to do is divide out that 4. So we're going to have 4 times, and to see what goes in the parentheses, we can just go ahead and divide each term by 4. So the first term, that 4 is going to cancel, so this is x squared. And the next term, negative 16 over 4 is negative 4, and still x is still there. And the last term, we're going to have negative 12. So we've now factored out the 4. And of course, now we just have to factor what's still in parentheses. Okay, so we have to factor this. Okay, so this one has a the coefficient of x squared is 1. A is 1. So we can do that simpler method. We just need to find numbers, two numbers that add to negative 4. And remember, they have to multiply to 12. Okay? I'm sorry, negative 12, which is this term here. So what are those? Well, we write down negative 12, and they have to add to negative 4. So it's going to be a negative times a positive, where the negative number is the larger magnitude, the larger absolute value. And we think about it a little bit. See, we could go negative 12, 1, and those add to negative 11. So if we go negative 6 and 2, those add to negative 4. So there's our numbers. And so our 4 is still there as a factor. And remember, in this method, this simpler method that you can use when the coefficient of x squared is 1, once you get those numbers, you just fill them in to the binomials like this. Okay, and it's, actually I should put a negative sign there, negative 6 and plus 2. Okay, and that's it. That is factored. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So first thing we're going to do, check for greatest common factor, and we look at these terms, and we can divide 2 out of all of those, but that's the greatest common factor. We cannot divide 4, or of course 3 won't go into any of them. 2 is the greatest common factor. So the first thing we will do is divide out the 2. So here's where I've written greatest common factor is 2. So we could have 2 here. And what goes inside we find by dividing each term by 2. Okay, and the first one is 3x squared, then minus 2x, and then minus 8. And at every step you can do a quick check. Let's distribute that, multiply back, like this, and see if we get what we're supposed to get. Our original polynomial. So our original quadratic, 2 times 3x squared is 6x squared. 2 times negative 2x is negative 4x. 2 times negative 8 is negative 16. So now we need to factor what's in the parentheses here. This one does not have that simple case where a is 1. So we're going to have to do the AC method, the AC split the middle method, that is. And so that means we want to find two numbers that add to negative 2 and multiply to the product of a times c, right? The 3 times negative 8, that is negative 24. So two numbers that multiply to negative 24. So let's find the numbers. Of course, one will be negative, one will be positive, and again, we want them to add together to make negative 2. So the negative one is the larger absolute value number. So it's only 2 larger though, so yeah, it's negative 6 and 4. Okay, that'll multiply to negative 24 and add to negative 2. So we've got it. This is where we have to then split that middle term, and so we write 3x squared. The negative 2x we're going to write as plus 4x minus 6x, and then we have the negative 8. We're going to group these together, which we like to do with this little box. And now we find the greatest common factor of each of those groups. And divide it out. So this is just x, right? The numbers, you have a 3, you have a 4, no common factors there. So it's just x. Let's divide that out. Well, let's go ahead and see what the greatest common factor of the other one is first. We can't take an x out, of course, from both of those terms. The last term does not have an x. So we will factor out negative 2. That's the largest, the greatest common factor. So now we're going to factor out that x from those first two. We'll have something inside, and we have to figure out what goes in the parentheses. And the way we can find that, we could do it in our head, but we can also write 3x squared divided by the greatest common factor is x, plus 4x divided by x. And that leaves 3x plus 4. Okay? And we multiply that back real quick. X times 3x is 3x squared. X times 4 is the 4x. So we get the 3x squared plus 4x when we multiply it back. It is correct. So we're going to factor out the negative 2 here from the other, the other group that's in the other box. Greatest common factor is negative 2. And so we take that negative 6x, divide that by the negative 2, negative 8 divided by negative 2. To see what goes in the parentheses, we get 3x plus 4. Negative 8 divided by negative 2 is 4. And this is great because we have the same thing in parentheses, just like we hoped. Looking good. We factor that out of each of these two products, so that leaves 3x plus 4 times x minus 2. Okay. The x minus 2, of course, comes from here. We factor 3x plus 4 out of each of those products. And of course, we cannot forget this 2 that was here. We sort of dropped it. We haven't been writing it down along with that. It's kind of cumbersome to write that all along. You have to put more parentheses out and say, well, there's a 2 here. Don't forget that. So usually I just remember at the end, oh yeah, we factored out a 2 at the very beginning. Okay. So again, it's right here. So it is still here, and that's our answer. Okay. Right there, it's 2 times the quadratic, right? And when you factor the quadratic into these two binomials, the 2 has to be included to have all the factors. Okay. So let's look at the next one. So we think we're going to have a common factor here, right? But there's really not a very large one. Now notice here we have this extra x, even the the constant term is times x. The middle term's actually times x squared here, and the x squared term is x cubed. There's an extra x, so to speak, multiplied by each term. So we're going to factor that out as well. So 3x is our greatest common factor. Okay, so we divide that out. Okay, and that gives us, well, of course, the 3x is still there. When we factor it out, we see what to put in the parentheses by looking at what we get when we divide by that 3x. And here we got 12x squared. Here we have 11x. And then we have plus 2. Here the x's cancel, right? It's 6 divided by 3, which is 2. Okay, so we look at what's in the parentheses. We got to factor that now, right? We factored out the 3x. That's all well and good. Now inside the parentheses, we have a quadratic. This one's going to require the AC split the middle method. So we have to find out what numbers to use, and they're going to add to 11, and they're going to multiply to, that's our 12 times our 2. This is times it's positive 24. Okay, I better actually get rid of that, write that a little bit better. Positive 24. So let's figure out what the numbers are. They add to 11. No negatives here. Hope that actually makes it a little simpler, right? Products of 24 that add to 11. Of course, a negative times a negative would also multiply it together to get a positive number, right? But they would not add to a positive number if they're both negative. So we know this time they're both going to be positive. And with a little thinking, we see, well, 2 times 12 doesn't work. That adds up to 14. 3 times 8, yeah, that adds to 11 and multiplies to 24. So that's it. So that's our numbers we use to split the middle. So we'll write 12x squared plus 3x plus 8x, we split that middle term, plus 12. No, plus 2, sorry. Okay, so now we do our boxes. We take the greatest common factor out. What's the greatest common factor in the first group? See, we have 3x. You can take 3x out of it, right? You can take 3x out of that term. You can also factor 3x out of that term. Okay, and then for this one, GCF is just 2. So we're going to factor that out from each of the groups. So we have 3x, and let's see, give myself a little more room here. 3x, and we've got this binomial. And how do we fit that in? We're factoring 3x out of each of these terms, right? So one way to get it is just take 12x squared divided by 3x plus 3x divided by 3x. So now we see 12 divided by 3 is 4, and x squared divided by x, that of course leaves 1x there, 4x, and here we have plus 1, that cancels. Okay, and on this one we're factoring out a 2, and this is plus here. We could write down the plus. 2 times okay, and what goes there? Well, we take the 8x divided by 2 and 2 divided by 2. So here we have 4x plus 1. It's very fortunate that turned out that way, because now we do have the same binomial there. So we factor that binomial from each of these, and you have 4x plus 1 times 3x plus 2. Okay, there's our 3x, there's our 2. And that is factored, except we have to remember that at the beginning we factored out a 3x from the whole thing. So when we factor this into binomials, we just did this, of course. The 3x is still there. This is kind of funny looking, because it happens that we had a 3x right here that was the greatest common factor of this group, and we factored that out, and that worked. This 3x that we write down at the end is totally different, right? It did not come from here at all. It came from up here. It just happens there's a 3x there. Okay? But that might look confusing. Whoops. Okay. So there's one more. We have 6x squared plus x minus 2. And first thing we're doing, that 6 is not a prime. So we're going to have to check for the greatest common factor of all three of these terms. And we look at it, and gee, you can't take a variable out of all three terms. You can't take x out of all three terms. Look at the numbers. Well, the coefficient of x here is 1, so you can't divide anything out of that. This common factor has to come from all three. It has to be a factor of all three terms. So there's no GCF, which means we just proceed just like we did the other day. there is no GCF. So nothing to factor out. So since the coefficient of x squared is not 1, we do have to use the AC split the middle method. And so we're going to look for the pair of numbers that add to get 1. Which is our coefficient of x there. So they have to add to 1 and multiply to a times c, which is negative 12. Okay, so let's see what those are. Factors of negative 12, and they have to add to 1. Positive 1 this time. So we have a negative number that the pair of numbers we have needs to multiply to make a negative number. So one will be negative, one will be positive. But this time when we add them, we're going to get a positive number. So it's going to be the positive one of these two numbers that's the larger magnitude. So we see, okay, yeah, 4 and negative 3, right? That will multiply to make negative 12. It will add to make positive 1, because 4 minus 3, or 4 plus negative 3, if you want to think of it that way, is positive 1. So we've got our numbers. We're now going to split this middle. So we get 6x squared plus 4x minus 3x, using that and that, right? Minus 2. And that's it. And we take a look at it, and yes, it does equal that. We've just replaced the x with 4x minus 3x. Okay, so we're going to draw our boxes around this. And what's our GCF here? It looks like it would be 2x, right? You can take 2x out of both of those. And our GCF here is going to be just negative 1, right? That's it. Okay. We will factor out a negative because we can tell we've got plus on the other side, no negatives. So it looks like that it's going to come out right if we factor out negative 1. So we're going to factor out this 2x. So we'll write 2x down here. And this is just on this group here. We are working with that right now. Okay. So we take the 6x squared divided by that greatest common factor of 2x. And then we have plus 4x divided by 2x. And so that gives us, that's going to cancel to 3x. And here it's plus 2. Okay. So over here, we're going to have a negative 1 that we factored out, and we're going to have to fill in what goes here. So that's negative 3x divided by negative 1 minus 2 divided by negative 1. And so that negative 3x divided by negative 1 is 3x. Negative 2 divided by negative 1 is plus 2. And just like magic, it works again. We do have the most common, that binomial is a common factor here of this first product. It's also a factor of that product. So we factor it out. And we have 2x minus 1. and that is factored, and we did not factor anything out at the beginning, right? There's no GCF. We look up here to see if we had factored out a 2 or something earlier on, we would have to include that here as a factor, right? But there's nothing there this time. So that is the answer. You multiply that back, FOIL it, you should get 6x squared plus x minus 2. You can do that yourself and make sure it works. So that's all of our examples, and see you later.